you were the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. And I think, the extent to which the average person thinks about that institution is probably very little. Maybe like Eminem saying the FCC won't let me be. Beyond that, what are we to make of the FCC and its power as an institution? What does it do, and how important should it be in the mind of the average American?
I think it's definitely shifted and increased in terms of visibility for the average American. I mean, back when I was a kid, I think most people would have thought of the FCC in the context you mentioned, Eminem, or way back in the day, Howard Stern fighting with the FCC over what you could say or not on the air. But I think increasingly that broadband, as opposed to broadcast, has become more important in Americans' lives, and especially during the COVID pandemic. I think it became crystal clear to every American, regardless of where you live or what you did, that you really needed access to the internet in order to do some of the things in your daily life that you wanted to do. And when it comes to broadband, the FCC is right at the heart of it. When I took the job in 2017, long before anyone had heard of COVID, of course, I said that closing that digital divide was my top priority, making sure that every American had access to the internet and advanced technologies. And that's only going to continue in the time to come. So I think more and more people are going to come to see the FCC as not just a sleepy agency in Washington that nobody knows about, but one of the premier agencies that is really geared towards giving people what I call digital opportunity in the 21st century.
So in other words, regulating access to the internet, that's the FCC.
Yeah, promoting more network infrastructure out there so that people can get access to the internet, and then also making sure that all of the innovation that we rely on when it comes to technology continues to have a pipeline. So the spectrum, for example, that our wireless devices rely on, the satellites that are increasingly being deployed in space, all of those things are funneled in some sense or the other through the FCC. And so I think the FCC also has a forward-looking mission to think about where the puck is going, and then enable American consumers to skate towards that puck.
So that's basically like air traffic control. That's like the FCC deciding, okay, this area of the spectrum is dedicated to these services, and making sure you deconflict, and there's channels dedicated to that specific kind of communication. That's kind of long been an FCC mission, but now there's just even more businesses in that space.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And one of the innovations that I tried to introduce during my time at the FCC was to get out of the business of picking winners and losers. And I'll just give you one quick example. We opened up, so right now you guys are probably using a Wi-Fi connection, I would imagine. Many people listening to this are probably using a Wi-Fi connection. Those Wi-Fi channels are increasingly congested. So one of the things we did was to increase by 5x the amount of spectrum that's available for Wi-Fi. And we had people saying, look, you should take the spectrum and dedicate it to this purpose or that purpose. And what we wanted to do is to have the humility to say, you know what? We don't know where innovation is going to take us. So let's not have the FCC determine for all time what the spectrum is going to be used for. Let's let it be unlicensed to let innovators and entrepreneurs figure out how to use it. And so that hands-off approach is one that we think is much better in the long run for consumers than saying, okay, this narrow slice is going to be used for transportation, this slice is going to be used for radio or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so we think actually that free market approach is one that is going to benefit consumers in a big way. And we're already seeing it. If you I went to my neighborhood Costco, for example, about a month ago and saw all these Wi-Fi 6 routers right there near the front. If you look at those Wi-Fi 6E routers, that's all a result of the FCC freeing up all of that Wi-Fi 6 spectrum. And so that's just one of the many examples of how we've kind of pushed the ball forward without steering exactly where it should go.
So, Ajit, I wanted to kind of ask you, you talked about broadband access being a real big issue, and we've seen Congress is finally starting to step in that regard with infrastructure, and it seems that both sides of the aisle, for the most part, believe that broadband is actually part of infrastructure, not just roads and bridges. You need broadband to apply for jobs and employment and all kinds of things. My question is, during your tenure, do you think you were, because I've read different things, I've seen people who have criticized you.
No, really?
Hey, trust me, you and I have that in common. People who have criticized you and said that you were not successful. And I know that you have touted the success of the FCC under your tenure. Do you think that you were successful in giving more Americans access to high-speed internet and broadband?
Oh, without question. I mean, the statistics clearly show, number one, that our networks are much faster and in real terms cheaper than they were in 2017 when I took office. And so that's in terms of the people who have access. And also in terms of the people who got access, millions more Americans have access to the internet today than they had in 2017. Now, there are some questions about, okay, whether or not the statistics are accurate in terms of the exact number of people, but in terms of the trend line, there's no question that that trend line has gone down in terms of the Americans who are off the grid, so to speak. And moreover, one of the things I pushed for way back before it was cool, if you look at my first major speech in March of 2017 as FCC chairman, there's an entire section there talking about how the president and Congress, who at the time were talking about infrastructure, should include in that plan substantial funding for broadband. And I reread that a couple of weeks ago. The paragraphs that I'm talking about echo exactly what Congress passed recently in terms of that infrastructure bill. So both in terms of doing the legwork at the FCC, but also using the bully pulpit, I feel like we did a lot to push infrastructure ahead and get more Americans connected. And by the way, I actually met many of these people. I've met a woman on a tribal reservation in New Mexico, a farmer in North Dakota, people in the Delta in Mississippi who had just gotten internet access thanks in part to some of our policies. So this isn't some abstraction that I'm talking about. I actually seen in many parts of the country some of these people who have been benefiting from our digital work.